Good afternoon, and welcome to this Power Hour event with Baroness Helena Kennedy. My name is Kezia Dugdale, and I'm the director of the John Smith Centre and your host for the next 60 minutes. Our mission here at the John Smith Centre is to make the positive case for politics and public service. We try and do that in three core ways. First of all, through research, we study the relationship between the public and their public servants. We also run a variety of different internship and development programmes designed to break down the barriers that many people face accessing public life. And we also seek to advocate for politics and public service as a force for good in the world. And we do that through a variety of events like these Power Hours, which you're joining us for today. This year's Power Hour series is devoted to the theme of women in public life. Each event is recorded and available to watch again on our website in full or with edited highlights. And during each session, we talk to our guests about their early lives and what shaped them, their current work, and their hopes and fears for the future. We're joined today by one of Britain's most distinguished lawyers. She has spent her professional life giving voice to those who have the least power, championing civil liberties and promoting human rights here in the United Kingdom and across the globe. She has published a number of books, including 2 on how the justice system is failing women, and has written and broadcasted on many issues over the years. Currently, she has taken on the role of director to the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute. She directs the Institute's work upholding the rule of law and human rights globally. Welcome, Helena. We are thrilled that you're able to spend some time with us today.
Kez, it's really lovely to be here, and of course I knew John Smith. He was a great hero to me, and something of a mentor, because of course he was in my profession too. He was a great lawyer, and I have to tell you that it was a great. I mean, it grieves me still, because he died on the 12th of May, which is my birthday. So every time I have my birthday, I also sort of, in my heart pay a tribute to a great man.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And of course, it would be marking 30 years since his passing next year. So there'll be a huge amount of events and things of interest for us to share in the coming year as well. I wonder if we could start today just talking a little bit about your early life before we get into some of the meat of the current issues that you're grappling with. I've read your most recent book, Miss Justice, so I know the answer to this question, but for the benefit of our attendees today, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you started out. Were you always going to be a lawyer? Who encouraged and who inspired you?
Well, the truth is that I can't remember the sort of the light bulb moment. Although my teachers, years after I had gone into the law, and I had some reunions with some of my old teachers at school, I shouldn't say old teachers, but I suppose they were reasonably old by then. But they said I talked about becoming a lawyer, but I haven't any memory of that. What I did have was I had 2 great encouragers as teachers. One was, in fact, Moira Kennedy, who is named for me, was not related to me at all, although I have a sister called Moira Kennedy. But Moira Kennedy, who actually taught me science, and who was my form mistress, and who was terrific and a real encourager of women going on to higher education, because I was from a working class family. Both my parents had left school at 14 or 13. They were, and I had 2 older sisters, both of whom had left school at 15. But I had real encouragement, both from my older sisters and from great teachers at Holyrood School in the south side of Glasgow. And we were working class folk. I was brought up in a tenement until we eventually got a corporation house when I was about 10 or 11. But one of the main influences for me, in fact, was a man. There was a man called John Lavelle who taught me Latin and then persuaded me to do classical Greek. And I got really one-to-one tuition from him in that, because so few people were then by that time doing classics at a state school. And I loved doing it because I also learned from him about all kinds of other things, and about, speaking truth to power, and about how important it was to ask the question why, and that was part of the democratic intellect. And he was a great believer in all of that, and which are very important values in Scotland. And so, and he ran the debating society at school, and he got me involved in debating, and I think that sort of debating often is at the root of understanding. Sometimes you have to make an argument, which might not be what your heart says, but where you learn how to make the argument. Where do people's commitments to certain ideas come from, and why do they think in a particular way? And so it's putting your feet into the shoes of other people, and it does prepare you for becoming a lawyer. And then I think he was my influence, and he certainly gave me wonderful references when I was applying to law school. So John Lavelle, I think, was probably my big influence. But part of it was that my mum, I remember my mother, running out, going on messages and stuff, and she was hit on the head. A building was derelict, and she was a slate came off a building, and it split her head open. And I remember it nearly blinded her, and she had a cut that ran through into her eye, and I remember that people said to her, "May you should take legal action, because that building there was no way to, it was not being looked, it was not being properly renovated and stuff." And she was frightened to go to a law firm, because she thought, as soon as I put my foot in the door, it's going to cost me money, and the idea of engaging lawyers just seemed such a kind of off-putting thing to a working class woman. And so it was that business of thinking, law didn't seem to be for the likes of us. And then my dad was a trade unionist, and my father used to often have to sort of try to get compensation for people who had industrial injuries and things like that. And so again, I saw how hard it was for ordinary folk to really make use of law. And so that was what made me think that I would like to become a lawyer, and that I would do it, and be a lawyer for ordinary members of society.
It's fair to say that your mum wasn't overly keen on you becoming a lawyer, though, right? Particularly when you decided to head to London.
My mother thought that the best thing a woman could ever do was to become a teacher, and I suppose in her heart it's something that she would have liked to have done herself. And she thought it was the perfect thing, as you would in the at that time. I mean, because it was the late 60s when I was making decisions about education. She thought that to become a teacher, and that you could combine it with having a family, and you'd have long summer holidays and so on. And I think that she had that was the thing that she thought was the perfect career for a woman, and she really wanted to encourage me to do that. And in fact, my younger sister, became a teacher, and then one of my older sisters, who went back into education when she was older, became a teacher. So, but I wanted to do law, and I also wanted to flee the coup. I wanted to, smoke gauloises on the south bank of the Latin Quarter in Paris. I'd read all the books, and I thought I wanted a life beyond. And so I headed off to study in London, because I had got a job the previous summer in an office in London, and I got to know all the girls who worked in this office, and they all encouraged me and said, "Oh, you should come and study in London." And so I decided that that's what I wanted to do. Well, my mother thought that, oh my God, that London was the den of iniquity, and nobody should go there. And so, I resisted her claim on me, and I went off to study in London.
It's so lovely to hear these stories, particularly from the students who are watching today, because it's reaffirming about the choices that they make and the considerations that you have in your mind at these key moments that end up shaping the rest of your life. And just a reminder to everyone watching, they can ask questions during this event. I know quite a few of you have sent them in advance, but you can ask questions live, and they'll come through to the team here at the John Smith Centre. We'll ask as many of them over the course of the next 60 minutes as we possibly can. So we could just speed forward a little bit. You qualify as a lawyer and you start to practice. When did you first believe that you were making a difference, either to an individual or to a system more generally?
Because when I'm reflecting on this, I started out having quite a sort of decent class analysis, because my father was in the trade unions, and of course I was brought up as a Scot, and politics was part of the daily bread and butter of discussions that you had certainly in the sixth form and so on. And I was most definitely understood the nature of class and why and what that did in our society, that kind of was sort of so kind of locked into a class system where often working class people had limitations put on their lives, aspirations because of it. But what I learned in the 70s, and of course, I mean, I could be mothers to most of the people who are listening, and possibly even grandmother to many of them, is that I realized that actually I became a feminist. I became involved in the women's movement in the 70s, and it really put another perspective, another light was shone on the ways in which power was shared in our society or was spread out in our society. And law is about power. And you have to start asking those questions is, where does law come from? Where do those rules of our society come from? And women didn't have power. And we know, looking back on time, that the law had been made by men. And even, and so we know that. And it was made either in Parliament, but also made in our higher courts, because judgments in the highest courts then fed down into the legal system in the lower courts, were guided by what was decided by the grandee judges. And they were all men, and they were all men of particularly one class background. So there was that intersectionality of power, where it was vested, and that it was. And then, of course, once I started practicing, not only did I see, and I started looking at what was happening through the eyes of a woman, and there were not that many. There were only about 4 or 5% of practitioners were women when I started. But I started looking at the law, and when I acted for women, the judgments that were being made. If you could say that your client was a good wife and mother, then you might get a bit of clemency. But if she was a woman who was breaking the rules in any way, and didn't seem to be conforming to ideas of what was good womanhood, then often women were punished even more severely. And it was that thing that women were being judged not just in accordance with the law, but also with ideas about womanhood, the stereotype of what conformed to good womanhood. And so I mean, you saw it with poor women. The first case that I ever did, I was telling some people about it last night, was a woman who ended up being sent to prison for shoplifting, and she'd done it several times before. But it was, stealing shoes for her kids out of, the Marks and Spencers, or, different stuff. And it was because, her man had run out on her. She was left with kids, had difficulty making ends meet, and so on. And then she's in breach of a suspended sentence, was being sent to prison. And her last thing to me was, phone my friend and tell her to take my kids and to look after them for me, because I don't want them taken into care. Phone my brother and get him to see if he'll agree to pay my rent for a while, so that I don't lose my council flat. And the horror and terrors of how a life is disrupted, and not her life only, but the lives of her children. And you start wondering, well, why wasn't there sort of work being done and support being given to her, rather than jailing her? And the majority of women in prison, shouldn't be there, because most of them have suffered abuse, violence in their childhood, and sexual abuse in their childhood, or that they've experienced abuse at the hands often of men as they've grown older. But the other thing is about having so little self-worth. And women, the messaging to women about worth is particularly pernicious. So I started looking at through the lens of gender and sex to determine, to look at how does law deliver, and law is still failing women. And we know this in so many areas. Now, I didn't exclusively represent women, because women make a very small percentage of the people appearing in the courts. And I was a civil liberties lawyer. And by God, did I also see the way in which that affected people of race, because when I was a young lawyer, the National Front were on the rampage across, certainly in England. There was the National Front did awful things in communities where there were significant numbers of Black people from ethnic minorities. And they were put in fear, and dog shit was put through their letter boxes, and rags with petrol on it, and places set on fire. And so I did a lot of work around race, and I also acted often. And gay women in the 70s didn't suffer a bad time. Into the 80s, they started, if gay women were together and were showing affection for each other in a public place, Publicans would turn them out of pubs and things like that. And so we started having to challenge that. But gay men in the 70s, it was absolutely terrible. You know, they had a vice squad, and they used to be sort of, they come out of a gay club or something, and they would be framed on charges. So miscarriages of justice can you know, I ended up doing lots of Irish cases and serious miscarriages of justice when I became somewhat more senior, and grievous miscarriages of justice affecting people. But listen, you know, things that are considered to be minor miscarriages of justice can be as horrifying in their impact on people's lives. And lots of gay men, you know, who, you know, they would be terrorized into pleading guilty because for offences they hadn't committed, because they didn't, you know, if there was no journalist in the court, then they would plead guilty because of you know, sexual importuning or something, because they didn't want their parents to know, or they didn't want their employers to know. It was a bad time. Not that I can say that there's any great good times, but it was particularly bad, 70s, 80s. And judges were not. I mean, we're now seeing many more kinds of people becoming judges, which is renovating our judiciary a bit. But back then, it was really it was not a good time, and so I started, you know, speaking out and challenging that, and I started writing about it, and then appearing on Women's Hour in the 80s. And on women's pages in papers about the way in which law was failing women. I've had a very, very interesting practice on, you know, as I developed in the law, but it was very much about testing the rule of law. You know, if the law is fundamental, as we know in a democracy, and if we can't get it to serve everybody, then it's failing. And even to this day, I'm afraid we haven't perfected it.
So there are many questions around women in the justice system that I want to put to you, and we'll get into those in a moment or two. But just before we leave the kind of introductory remarks, you know, hearing you talk about how the legal system consistently fails people, and very often specific groups and very often minorities, I wonder why you persevered with the law for so long when other people might have looked at such sustained systemic failure and thought politics was the answer. Did you ever look at the law and think, I actually need to become elected and change the fundamental infrastructure here, or you saw law as the way to change the system?
Well, to tell you the honest truth, I didn't. And it didn't ever occur to me to stand for Parliament. Honestly, I was, and I actually have loved law, and I feel that I've effected perhaps more change as somebody who was, as a practitioner. I started moving the barriers around things like the ways in which women were cross-examined, and the ways in which women were denigrated in the eyes of a jury by asking them about their sex lives, asking them about their mental health background, asking them things that were no relationship to anything that was actually the jury needed to look at and examine. But it was a way of poisoning a jury's attitudes towards the women on trial. And also, it was that interesting thing. I was very concerned about women as the complainants in cases, as those who'd been at the receiving end of horrible crime like rape and domestic violence and sexual offences and all of that. But I was also concerned about the fact that often I was representing women on burglary or handling or looking after the criminal proceeds of robberies on behalf of their menfolk. And then when you examined their lives and got you to talk with them, you know, when you spent time in the cells and heard their stories, you realized that they actually had themselves been victims, they more often than not. And so it became clear to me that the vast majority of women in prison shouldn't be there at all. And then, although the word intersectionality has entered our language much more recently, I was conscious, and I wrote about it even in the 80s and 90s, about the ways in which Black women in the courts, you know, it was that idea that these were women who were angry. And they were angry, and they had good reason to be angry. But it obviously sort of created a sort of fear or in some way, and in the courtroom, and women often, black women often got much more punishment than other women. So I became very conscious of that, and my antennae for that was strong. And so actually giving voice to all of this. I mean, there were women, though, there were senior women around who used to say to me, don't rock the boat, you know, when you get up there, you can make difference. But I mean, I was a boat rocker, and I wasn't going to remain silent. And that's the problem, is that women have been silenced too often. And so the major message I would give to everybody is we mustn't be silenced. We have to call out things that we see going wrong. But also reforming the law actually can hugely impact lives. And people like myself can impact Parliament and parliamentarians and people in parliaments by bringing our expertise, you know, because we see it in the raw, and make sure that people who are lawmakers in parliaments are well informed, and that we can indicate ways in which the law can be changed to make the difference.
I'd like to move on to talk about the second of the two books you've written about women in the justice system, which is called Misjustice: How British Law is Failing Women. But your first book did exactly what you've just described. When you published Eve Was Shamed, that led to really significant reforms to the law as it operates in England and Wales, and certainly had ramifications in the event of devolution in Scotland in terms of how the Scottish law would evolve as well. I finished it at the weekend, and it seems wrong to say I loved it, even though I did, because it's such a harrowing and angry read. And I just wonder if I could start by asking you, you know, given the horrors which are, you know, aplenty in this book, how you carry that pain and anger, because as you say in the book, you've seen much of the world's inhumanity in practice. How do you carry that and stay hopeful and positive?
Well, I mean, I've been lucky. I'm sustained by fabulous women friends, and I've got, you know, a whole sort of cohort of great women who I love, and they love me, and that's really important in my life. I've got a great husband who has been a great support to me, and kids, and I've had a good family life. But I mean, which isn't to say that I haven't had my, you know, bad things happen. My first serious relationship with the father of my child, he and I separated in a very painful way, where, you know, he'd met somebody else, and so I've experienced that business of abandonment and feeling, you know, rejection and stuff. So I can't pretend that I haven't had my own areas of pain in my personal life, but in my professional life, I have been sustained by learning how to kind of, if you almost compartmentalize it, to go home, to be with people, to find sustenance in music and in reading and those things, you know, those lovely nurturing things. So I have found my way of doing that. It's still very hard. I mean, there are times, I mean, in recent years, I'm now doing international law. I mean, some of it is just horrible. You know, I meet with women. I mean, the Yazidi women were the most terrible enslavement of those women by ISIS. You know, in northern Iraq and so on. These women were turned into sex slaves. You know, and they were just raped over and over and over again and passed between men, and you know, meeting them and, you know, and just embracing them and hearing about their pain is just terrible. And then they were impregnated. And then in order to go back to their own families were so kind of caught up in patriarchal ideas, they wouldn't accept children of their enemy that had been produced as a result of rape by the enemy, and so they wanted the girls to leave their babies behind in refugee camps, and some of them did, and then are living with the pain of that separation. It's I mean, and then women that I've met, you know, who are Uyghur, who have been persecuted in Xinjiang province in China. I mean, some of this stuff is awful. And I was also involved in the investigation of Jamal Khashoggi. He was a man who was murdered in Turkey, in the Saudi Arabian consulate, by a hit squad from Saudi Arabia. We have no doubt about that. They ended up being prosecuted in Saudi Arabia, although we are not sure about what ultimately happened there. But he was, I had to go out and hear the evidence of that, and it was on tape because the embassy was bugged by the Turks, and the Turkish intelligence had the tapes of this man being murdered and then his body being cut up, and you could hear the saw that was used to do. I mean, it was horrible, and so there are times where you think, "Oh my God, I'm going to have nightmares," and you do for a while afterwards. But you do learn to compartmentalize. You do learn as you become. It's part of professional existence, and of course, there must be people like psychiatrists who deal with much worse than me.
I've got a number of very specific questions about the functioning of the law as it affects women coming through now. I think we've got lots of lawyers on the call, so they'll be quite direct to you. I wonder though if we could start just a little bit around a concept you discussed in the book called double deviance. So the idea that women in the justice system face attack on two fronts: one, the crime that they're accused of, but two, being tested against society's definitions of womanhood and femininity in particular. I wonder if you could give us a few examples of where you've seen that double deviance in practice that's been particularly...
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen it all the way through my practice, where women, because of their sexuality, because they might be gay women, women who, because they, they are, it's that business where there was an expectation when I started doing domestic violence killings, where a woman might end up killing the man who'd abused her for years. If she was somebody who was not some mouse of a woman and who was meek and docile, then they didn't want to believe that she was someone who had been long-term abused. And that question of why didn't she leave? And if the woman held down a job, or she was, I was in a taxi not that long ago, and the taxi driver said to me, "I know you." He said, "I was on a jury in a case of yours at the Old Bailey." And now we're not supposed to ever talk to jurors about cases or anything of that sort. And I played by the rules, but I didn't stop him talking. and he said to me, he said, it was women on the jury who were being very hard on your client. They didn't want to acquit her. And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, and it was partly because your client was very vivacious, and they found it hard to believe that she would have, and they thought that she was a flirt. They thought that she was the sort of woman that would provoke her husband. I mean, the idea that you provoke your husband into battering hell out of you, I mean, it was so interesting. And we've got to understand that at the base of all of this, as we know, is we're in a society in which patriarchal power is still around. But the business of misogyny has got to be understood. And as you know, I was asked to come and do a report for the Scottish Parliament, and it was on that whole issue of it was after the business of the hate crime bill, not including anything on women at all in the end, and the outrage that Scottish women across the board felt about being excluded from a bill that was supposed to be dealing with the ways in which all manner of people experienced particular forms of hatred. And the business of misogyny has to be understood, and I'm afraid that the police do not understand it, and most men don't understand it. Well, first of all, because men will say to you, I don't hate women. I like women. I just don't like lesbians, or I don't like feminists. I can't stand feminists, they'll say. Loudmouthed women that are always going on about, and you realize that, I mean, we have to stand together and say, hatred of any of us is a form of hatred, and we know that feeds into a system of sustaining ideas and stereotypes of how women ought to be, and we're not going to refuse to conform to those things. And women will be in all our differences and all of our original ways of being and our humanity. And so just shove off, we're not having that. And we've got to define misogyny as being about a sense of entitlement, about a sense of male primacy, and not, don't get locked into hate or not hate, because hating any of us is enough for me. And so we really did try to then look at how do you shift the dial, instead of it always being that women are examined, when they make complaints about what happens to them, and they start looking about, did she bring it on her own head, or what was she wearing, and what was she doing, and what did she say? And somehow justifications are found, located in the woman, and rather than concentrating on what was he thinking about, why was he saying to her, and the evidence that we heard. And I do think that some of this has actually become much worse, which is that the business of social media and the way in which women can be at the receiving end of so much vile abuse and threat, that it has actually migrated from online to offline, and that disinhibition, the ways in which people felt uninhibited about what they could say. I'm going to come and screw you or whatever. I don't know how censored we have to be about the language, but all I can tell you is the language is never good. And then when women take exception to it, they have no sense of humor, or but it's now moved to the public square. It's now happening when women come out of a bar with their women friends, or a restaurant, or a club, or they come out of the student union, or even coming out of school, and they get this stuff thrown at them, and I'd like to shag you, or whatever. And then when the women say get lost, then they say nobody'd want to shag you, you're a big fat cow, and horrible stuff that then women internalize and take home with them. And we've got to do something about it. So I mean, I do think that we all, I experienced sexual harassment. I experienced it within my profession. I experienced it in other parts of my life. But I think that it's reached a level which was, I don't remember people sort of saying, you're a fucking ugly old thing, and who would want to fuck you? All that. I don't remember that being said. Although I do remember people squeezing and touching and, all those things. So I think it has got in some ways worse.
So the work you've done on misogyny and given to the Scottish Government will lead to a new Act of Parliament, which will be introduced, I understand, this year, and led by Scotland's Justice Secretary Angela Constance. And it's really interesting to hear you describe the background to why we're now talking about misogyny as something that didn't feature in the previous hate crime bill. But I wonder, just given that example you gave about somebody in a taxi queue shouting abuse towards a woman, where's the criminal test for that? When does it become a criminal act? Would shouting at somebody in a taxi crew then be a criminal offence like you've described there? Is that the bar?
Well, what we did in the thing was to make it that obviously, if you're shouting at, I fancy you, I wouldn't mind going home with you. There's levels of this, but almost all hatred, Kez, in the hate crime legislation, what we recognized was that it's usually language that has this business of making something, gives the testimony that leads us to say that there is an aggravating feature here, which is about racism, for example. And it's usually that you black whatever, or you filthy brown rag-headed whatever. That's what gives us the indicator. But in the more grievous kinds of this thing, then of course I think that looking at people's phones and looking at their social interactions in their social media gives you another indication of whether they are people who are whose attack on somebody from a minority, or whose attack is something that might be based on misogyny, attacks on women. We have to look for the evidence of that. So shouting at somebody in a queue, something that is kind of offensive, nobody's talking about just minding and finding somebody ignorant and idiotic, but it's about the uglier stuff, which really does diminish women's sense of themselves, their feelings about wanting to be out in public places, the way in which women feel frightened by some of that language. I mean, the number of times we heard evidence from women about being in public places where they're then actually put in fear by the aggressive nature of the ways in which they're spoken to. And that business at the bus stop, of, saying, please go away. And then thinking, oh my God, if I get on this bus, he's going to follow me. If I get on this bus, and then he follows me, he'll see where I live. And so all of that. And so and it goes back to something that's so important. And it goes back to the business about how we bring up our children, where, little girls from the age of 8 and 9, and we know what we do. I mean, I had to stop I had to do it myself. I can't pretend that I didn't say to my daughter Cleo when she was little, don't talk to men if they stop their cars and so on. And you do emphasize the men bit. You don't go into the park, and if a man starts, and we already are inculcating in our girls a sense that there's bad stuff out there, and that you've got to protect yourself, and that you have to self-safeguard. And there's a sense in which then women feel that if something bad does happen to them, they must have somehow failed in what you're supposed to do to protect yourself. It must have been my fault that this happened to me. Why did he do it to me? And women all say that to you. All my clients have always said, why did he rape me? Why did he do that to me? And we know that it's often about that business of entitlement, that business of wanting you. But I have to tell you rather sadly, when I was doing that work with a great panel of people, I did see one of the senior judges in Scotland. And listen, this would be said of our judges in England as well. But I spoke to a senior Scottish judge, and I said to him, we know that rape, of course, is a misogynistic crime. And he said, well, and I don't know that I agree with you. I think it's sometimes just about lust. And I said, is that an abuse of power? He went, no, I think it's just about desire sometimes. And you just basically, you're switched on and you just couldn't turn it off. Well, I'm sorry. It kind of is a bit depressing if that's what we're hearing from those who are sitting in judgment. And that's why when there's discussion about, do we take it away from juries and give it to judges? Well, some judges yes, and some judges no. And my concern is that it starts eroding the business of jury trial. But it's not to say that there aren't things that we can do. And it's not to say that judges, well-trained judges who are not saying it's just some men, you desire a woman, she's so beautiful, you can't help yourself. Well, I'm sorry, but if a woman is making it clear she doesn't, is with, do you ask her? Do you say, do you want it? I mean, the idea that somehow you get overwhelmed and overcome, and you have to somehow have sex with somebody, like turning on the washing machine and the cycle has to go through to the end, it's just ridiculous.
There are lots and lots of questions coming through now, but several people would really like to hear your thoughts on the proposal for juryless rape trials in Scotland in particular. And I'm conscious in the book more broadly, you talk about your frustration at the lack of conviction rates for rape, but you warn against somehow reducing the burden of proof in situations like this because of the overarching issue of the rule of law. Give us some reflections on both juryless rape trials and indeed wider reform around rape.
You see, my concern is that once you start, be careful what you desire, and be careful of the law of unintended consequences. I would like there to be better research into juries and why they make certain decisions. And there's an embargo on doing it, certainly in England and Wales. I don't know whether they've ever done proper research in Scotland with juries, but I think it would be a useful thing to do. One of the things, there is no doubt that part of this is about still thinking, oh, she had it coming to her. There's still, and women, we've got to remember that women can be misogynistic because it's about being socialized into a way of thinking. And that's what misogyny is. It's a way of thinking. And women can be absorbed in that thing about how women ought to behave and so on. So I'd like us to do more research into it. I certainly, I'm not against there being a pilot, but all I can tell you is that the jury system is really important because it's a way in which you bring the community into the system. And I believe in that because you need law to be endorsed by the folks and not just by grandees and judges, and even women judges, because sometimes they're very remote from the lives of ordinary citizens. But I do think that once you start eroding jury trial, then you can be sure that they'll start saying, well, do we need juries in murder trials? It's really very difficult for people. Sometimes the details are not very nice and so on. And it's serious crime. We shouldn't have it in terrorist trials. We shouldn't have it in fraud trials because, you know, ordinary folk are not smart enough to understand finance. You know, you will erode the whole system. And so my thing on this is, first of all, I love the idea that, and I think we should be doing more of it. And it started in Scotland. The first case where I ever remember somebody suing somebody who'd raped them was in Scotland.
Miss
And yeah, it was, yeah. And I think we should be doing that much more often. I definitely think that the suggestions that have come out of the English Law Commission published just today about really not allowing cross-examination about people's access to people's mental health history or people's medical history and so on. I mean, there's too much of that goes on. The shift that took place was, well, you're not allowed to, you know, there's a limitation on cross-examining about sexual past, but you can now cross-examine about people's mental health and suggest that they're basket cases. Now, you see, let's look at the business of the woman in America who took Trump to court through a civil action. It's quite interesting because, of course, it lowers the burden of proof. It's on the balance of probabilities. So many people said to me, well, why wasn't he convicted of rape? She obviously was saying she was believed as a witness, but what about rape? And the interesting thing is that whole business about, I suspect that jury were, and the majority of them were men, I suspect that jury actually felt that he corroborated her account himself, because what was he doing but grabbing a woman by her pussy? And he'd said, you know, there's a tape recording of him saying those kind of things, that particular thing, but other things about women. So the idea that he would, you know, feel entitled and to push her into a thing, and then and what it was, of course, was you know, putting his digitally and penetrating her into her vagina. What was not accepted was that he actually raped her, and that was partly because, I suspect, because she had not told the two friends that she phoned immediately afterwards. She said, I've had a horrible, terrible experience, and, you know, sexual, and he's attacked me, and he did, and he, you know, and she never ever used the word rape. And those witnesses didn't ever say, they said actually in cross-examination, well, she didn't say he'd raped her, but she said that he'd assaulted her in this way. And I think the absence of the word rape, unfortunately, was the thing that meant that they didn't get the conviction on the rape charge. And those things make a difference. Evidence does matter in cases, and it's hard, but I just think that there's been too many things stacked against women, and part of it is about attitudes.
And one of the things that's definitely increasing is how women and girls are treated online and the many pressures that come with social media. Particularly, actually, women in public life, it's well versed, and we talk about it a lot at the John Smith Centre. Diane Abbott being an example of somebody who faces an inordinate amount of abuse because she's both female and Black. I wonder if you could comment on the law and social media in this regard. You know, is the law capable, in your view, of providing effective protection to women and girls, given the power of social media companies? And we know that the Online Harms Bill is trying to address this, but does it go far enough?
Well, I think, listen, the whole business of trying to regulate big money is a problem in our societies, and I think that's partly been the economic methodology, which has allowed you know, profiteering to get out of hand, and so the unwillingness to regulate has. We're seeing it with the whole thing about rivers and water and sewage and water here in Britain. I mean, there was a regulator, but the regulator clearly didn't do the job that was required, and there they were making profits at the, you know, like bandits, robbing folk blind, and now they're going to mend it and then charge it more on the bills of ordinary people. So I mean, that whole failure to properly regulate and deal with large companies has been one of the follies of our time, and it has created great distance between the super rich and the multiplication of multimillionaires now and ordinary people's lives. So I mean, if we want to talk about that, I mean, the tech companies, of course, are the most recent examples of people getting away with murder. And so I think that they have to be regulated. But of course, it's one of those things where you need international law. And I'm afraid that at Westminster just now, we've got people who are totally disrespectful of law. They don't care about international treaties and about the ways in which that we as the United Kingdom signed up to international treaties. We've seen it with the failure to look what's happening in relation to the Refugee Convention being ignored in the South Coast. Look at the ways in which we have failed to, we've signed a treaty on Brexit, and then the next, within a year, we're tearing it up in relation to Northern Ireland. I mean, we've had people in government who have not been observant of the rule of law, and they themselves, we saw it with Boris Johnson during COVID, thinking that he's above the law. Well, I mean, we've had centuries of saying nobody should be above the law, but it's all returned. So can we do anything about the tech companies? Yes, we have to. Should the police be able to much more readily get the removal of anonymity in order to prosecute people who are making people's lives wretched? Absolutely. One of the things that I'm doing on the online bill came out of that work, that Scottish work on misogyny, because one of the things I'm saying is that what I discovered, and I didn't know this myself, was a lot of the stuff that's used to abuse women is no longer saying, I'm going to come and rape you, or I'm going to come and, disfigure you, or acid you and take that smile off your face, or I'm going to kill you. What they say is, somebody should kill you. Somebody should come and rape you. You deserve to be raped. And if you're Andrew Tate and you've got 7 million followers or whatever he's got, then you only need one of them to be a lunatic who decides to do it. And women know that. And so women receiving that messaging, knowing that these people have, and then there's a pile on and they get lots of it saying, yeah, that's what you need to be raped. Is a very terrifying thing for women. And it has a freezing effect, a chilling effect on women's lives. They start getting anxious about going out. They start getting anxious about how the things that they choose to do. No woman should be limited in that way. And so I want to see the law changed, absolutely.
And in that environment, the last thing they want to do when they see women of high profile face abuse like that is be like them, to stand for Parliament, to take on powerful forces. So we see that ripple everywhere. We are fast running out of time, so we're going to have to get a bit speedier at the old questions here, because we've got about 10 minutes left, and I've got a huge stack here. Some very specific questions about access to justice, if you don't mind. So how important is specialism in the law in tackling gender-based violence, for example, domestic abuse courts, sexual offence courts? And do you think the failure to implement a specialist family court approach in Scotland has led to women and children being ill served by the criminal justice service here?
Well, I mean, listen, specialising has been happening now for a long time. I mean, all my life. I've been a criminal lawyer and a discrimination lawyer, and then I used to be called a civil liberties lawyer. Now I'm called a human rights lawyer. But it's basically all about the same thing, which is about treating the whole person and recognising the humanity of the people who come before the courts and of those who are victimized in crime. But you need to have access to the courts, and you need to have access to expertise, and for me to be able to draw on expertise in order to fight cases well. And they have absolutely, we've seen a huge reduction in legal aid, in a sort of strangling of the justice system, and it being marginalized, and not getting the resourcing that it requires and needs. I do think that you don't necessarily want it to exist forever, but I do want us to be doing very active things around the issue of women inside the law. And at times that means specialist training, specialist prosecutors, people who are going to really know and understand this stuff. I want to see special, and it has to be imperative, mandatory training of judges on all this stuff. Not that they turn up if they feel like it, but they actually are required to sit and to listen to experts in the field who know about this stuff. We've had problems, certainly with judicial training down in England, which was that, they didn't want to be getting training from people in other disciplines, or people who, they would learn from other judges, but they weren't prepared to learn from anybody who wasn't of that judicial standing. Well, we've broken through all of that. though it's often useful to get great women judges from other jurisdictions to come in and talk to them, and to talk to them. I mean, like Canadian women judges have been very influential, I think, on some of our senior men, you know, who would be prepared to listen to them in the way that they might not be prepared to listen to, you know, women who have worked with battered women or abused women, or who understand coercive control. You know, to really understand that is important.
Has the nature of patriarchy and the way it shapes the judicial system changed in fundamental ways, or just superficially? Is it easier for women to progress in the law than when you first started?
It absolutely is. But what we have to recognise, and we have to do a number of things. Do not be seduced by the idea that you'll only get promoted on the basis of merit. We have to keep asking the question, what is meritorious? You know, I'm tired of this business of women saying, I don't want to be getting there other than on my own merit. And I say to them, yeah, but who's deciding what is merit? And is it being judged on things that are not going to value the things that you can contribute? So we've got to, first of all, sort of make sure that we're challenging the underpinnings of that. The other thing is that, of course, what I saw happening as I was coming up through the law was that when they started knowing that they had to start appointing women, they would often appoint safe women. They didn't want to appoint women that were going to be bullshit and difficult and, you know, all of that. And so there would be women who were, you know, who would be introduced into the senior judiciary, who didn't do an awful lot for women. And one of the things that you have to be, we are arguing for in diversity and inclusion, is that you have all kinds of women. And you need to have all kinds of people on the bench, from minorities, from different backgrounds, and it has to be, that whole business changes the discourse that happens between judges when they're talking about law, and you're challenged into thinking anew. And it's one of the things that is depressing me just now about this business of Suella Braverman not letting folk in with visas to be master's students in our, you know, in our university system, you know, because we know that studying alongside people from other backgrounds, people who are different from you, that's where we learn, is we learn from each other. And it's by people, you know this. I mean, look at the business in Ireland, where they had, they ended up having a referendum on should there be gay marriage. Now, the Catholic Church had Ireland back in a stranglehold. How did that all change? Because lots of grannies had a grandchild who was gay, and they thought, why shouldn't my grandchild be able to get married to the person they love, and so on? And they started shifting. People's personal experience shifted the whole thing, because people had come out saying that they were gay. You get change that way. And then it led to a kind of complete, you know, sort of the spotlight going on the church's influence and all these things, because of, you know, the horrors that were exposed about the church. So change takes place on many fronts. And some of it happens because of our exposure to different ways of thinking. And it's so important. And that's also what changes law.
Two final questions before we let you get on with your day, and they're moving towards politics more generally. You reportedly break the whip more often than any other Labour peer, confirming your status as a free thinker. Does that mean you've never voted against your conscience in your life? And what would you say to aspiring politicians who worry about being bound by a party line when we have a parliamentary democracy?
Listen, Kez, I mean, you've been in politics, and so you know this, is that, of course, there has to be a level of pragmatism. You know, I know that just now, I mean, I belong to the Labour Party. I'm a person who's left of, I mean, I'm a lefty. I'm a left-wing person. But I also know that, I mean, if we want to win elections, you have to be, you know, pragmatic. You have to be sensible. I also know that, you know, that you know, some things are not going to be possible. I mean, let's look at the business about, you know, people say, you know, Keir Starmer's not going to nationalise water, and he promised that he was going to do that if he became the leader of the Labour Party. But there's no bloody money around. I mean, we've seen Liz Truss trashing the economy and so on. You know, so, and you have to, what people don't seem to understand is that if you were to turn water into something that was a not-for-profit area of our lives, which I would very much like to see happening. The problem is you have to compensate all the shareholders. I mean, you have to compensate the people who've invested their money in it. And so there's going to be no money for doing any of that. So you have to tailor politics to some of that. However, I'm a lawyer. And I believe in the rule of law, and I believe in our international commitments and a rules-based order, because I think you only make the world, so the only way to peace and justice is through doing it together and across borders. So many of the problems facing the world cross borders. And so I just think that when New Labour was the Iraq War, I didn't approve of it. Locking up people without trial, detention without trial, like Guantanamo Bay, but we did it here, had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. I opposed all those things. I opposed erosions of civil liberties. And I opposed the business of using intelligence that was based on evidence that we were getting from other places based on torture. So, I mean, there were lots of things. And I'm opposing this government on all these things too, but usually alongside my Labour colleagues. But so it's law. I feel very strongly that the important role that law plays in securing decent lives for people. And so I'm afraid that when it comes to that, I'm not prepared to sell the pass. So, I mean, I'm afraid that I've got this appalling story told about me that I'm I'm disloyal, but I'm in fact very loyal to the legal system. And not, I mean, listen, law can be used to do terrible things to people. So I don't have a starry-eyed idea about law, but I do think that we've got to be true to the rule of law and to human rights.
And of course, we never described you as disloyal. We just talked about your eminence as a free thinker and framed it in that regard. Just one question that we ask all of our Power Hour guests before we let you get away, and I'll just briefly talk about some of the up and coming John Smith Centre events, is what advice you might have for young people aspiring for public life today? What would you have told a younger version of yourself?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I feel, looking back, that I feel really enhanced my life was the business of saying yes to things. You know, even when you're frightened of doing them. I remember I started sort of, I didn't know that I could write articles about things, and I sort of forced myself to do it because I wanted to get the message out about what was happening around women in law, and so I learned to speak about law in a way that was accessible, and so it was by saying yes when the Guardian or some women's magazine said to me, "Can you write an article?" Say yes to things, and you learn out. And then I also sat on things that were about theatre, and I sat on boards of things that I just loved, that were, and I think I became a better lawyer by sitting on community organisations where I learned really what was happening on to many people who were so disadvantaged. I've done lots of work, sort of volunteer work around refugees, you learn about human life from that. So I would say do other things as well as what you do in your own profession, because it makes you better as a lawyer or as a public servant or as anything. But actually, one of the most fulfilling things is actually finding a way to make a difference, doing it with others. You can never do it on your own. And life is about trying to improve the lot of more than ourselves. So my advice is say yes when people say, "Can you do something?" and make yourself available to other things. And in fact, it enriches your life as well as perhaps making a little bit of difference.
It's really excellent advice. Baroness Helena Kennedy, you are an absolute inspiration. I'm so glad that I get to say that to you publicly, and not just for the issues that we've discussed today, but for your entire life of public service. You really are something and somebody that we can all aspire to be more like. If we could just encourage people to pick up a copy of Miss Justice, because it is a compelling account of what's wrong with the justice system, but also how to make it better. It's full of hope and ideas as well, and I think that's a critical part of it. Values which you've exemplified the whole of your working life. So thank you very much for that. We're delighted to have you with us today. If you enjoyed that, please note that all our past hours Power Hours are available on our website, and we've got quite the back catalogue now. And if you'd like to shape who we hear from next, then please complete the super quick evaluation form, which will appear in your inboxes tomorrow. Our next Power Hour will be an in-person event at the Festival of Politics in Edinburgh with the Conservative peer Baroness Saida Varsi, and that's in August. Meanwhile, the next John Smith Centre event is on the 14th of June. at the University of Glasgow, where we'll be marking 25 years of the Good Friday Agreement, and we'll be joined by the former SDLP leader and Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland, Mark Durkan, the current MLA for Strangford and former leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Mike Nesbitt, and the founder of the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition, academic, peace activist and human rights defender, Professor Monica McWilliams. Until then, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you once again to Baroness Helena Kennedy. Bye for now.